Hello and welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'll be showing you how to perform an airfield VFR landing in an F-A-18C Hornet. I'll start by basically showing you on a diagram what are the different stages or steps of landing, how to communicate with the tower, and then we'll jump into the cockpit and show you how it's done in the cockpit. So let's go ahead and start. This diagram shows you how to perform the VFR landing on a runway at a very high level. This green strip here is the runway. This is the aircraft. This point here is called the initial point, which is 5 nautical miles away from the runway. We're going to talk about it later. And when the pilot wants to basically start his VFR landing process, he's usually much farther than 5 nautical miles, let's say 50 nautical miles away from the runway. And he has to start by making his first communication with the tower. And this communication has 4 main elements. The first element is he needs to identify the party he's trying to communicate with, in this case, the runway tower. The second element is he needs to identify himself, and in this case, it's the flight's call sign. The third element, he needs to state the BRA, or bearing, range, and altitude. And this is his bearing, range, and altitude from the runway, not the other way around. And the fourth element is he needs to state his intentions, which is he wants to land on the runway. So after he does that, the pilot aligns himself with the runway. So he might not be flying towards the runway in a way that he is aligned with it. So he needs to maneuver his aircraft and align himself with the runway, like shown in this diagram. And he needs to basically slow down his speed to 350 nautical miles, and then at the initial point he could be at around 5,000 feet above ground level, and he should start descending to around 800 feet above ground level just before he gets to the runway. So again, at the initial point, which is 5 nautical miles, he should be around 5,000 feet, 350 knots, and then he makes his second communication with the tower, which is he states that he's at the initial point, and then he starts to descend while maintaining 350 knots. So he would descend from 5,000 feet to 800 feet above ground level, so that when he reaches this point here, just in front of the runway, he's at 350 knots and 800 feet above ground level. And then the pilot needs to fly along the runway, and just when he gets to a point where he is at 3/4 of the runway, he needs to start what we call the brake turn. This diagram shows the brake turn at the end of the runway, which is wrong. He needs to be braking at around 3/4 of the runway, and it's a 180 degrees brake turn. When the pilot starts to brake, he needs to roll by around 70 degrees and then take his throttle down to idle and pull. People pull differently. Some people pull at 10% of, their speed. Myself, I pull at around 2G, and I maintain that 2 to 2.1 G. I maintain that through the turn. So basically, what happens is I roll by 70 degrees, I pull by 2G, and I start turning by 180 degrees. Because I moved my throttle to idle, my speed will start to bleed at around 250 knots. I'll be basically dropping my landing gear. At 230 knots, I'll be dropping my flaps to full. And as I'm doing the turn, I should be descending from 800 to 600 feet. So at this point here, which is abeam the runway, I will be at around 250 knots, not 250, maybe around 220, 210 knots. My gear will be down, my flaps fully deployed, my altitude around 600 feet. And then I'll be flying abeam the runway up to this point X. And this is the point where when the pilot looks to, let's say, his left-hand side in this direction, the tip of his AIM-9X seeker should intersect with the beginning of the runway. This is his cue that it's now the time to start turning. So at this point, the pilot starts to turn, again descending, maintaining his on-speed angle of attack until he touches down on the runway. This is in a nutshell what you do. Let's go ahead and jump to the cockpit and show you how it's done from there. I've loaded Digital Combat Series. I'm now going to the mission editor. I will load the mission relevant to today's video. Okay, so the mission has loaded. This is my aircraft, the blue icon that shows F, and I'm heading along this line towards this runway, which is Kutaisi runway. I'll be landing on runway 07. Kutaisi has a TACAN channel of 44, which I'll be putting in my navigation system to help me locate the runway. And this airfield, or this runway, has a declination of 66 degrees. Declination means the orientation of the runway, which would help me eventually understand how the runway is oriented as compared to my flight path. The declination is 66 degrees magnetic. So let's go ahead and start and load into the cockpit. Okay, the first thing I'll do is I'm gonna maintain a speed of around 350 knots. I'm gonna set my baro altimeter, my autopilot to barometric altimeter, and I'll switch my altitude indicator to radar altimeter to understand my altitude above ground level. I'm gonna then switch on my TACAN system. I'm gonna set it to 44X, which is that runway's TACAN. It's set. I'm gonna go to my HSI, select TACAN navigation, and you can see here, this is the TACAN that has been picked up by my systems, and it's 17, as you can see here, 16.8 miles away from me. I'm gonna go to my heading selector knob, and I'm gonna basically set the declination to 66 degrees. And you can see now, this is my airplane relevant to my flight path. This is the orientation of the runway. So I'm pretty much aligned with it. I'm gonna go ahead now and make my first call. Now notice, I'm gonna zoom out a little bit. If somebody is sitting in the tower, in the airfield looking at me, he's gonna have to look at in the 24 degrees direction here, and I'm around 12 nautical miles away. So I'll make my first call, and it's gonna be something around this. Kutaisi traffic, Airfield 11, 24 degrees, 11 miles, Angels 3.6, inbound for overhead 07. This is the first call that would basically help me or help the tower to know where I am and what my intentions are. I'm now around 9.9 miles, 9 nautical miles away from the field. I'm gonna start descending. I'm gonna try to maintain a speed of 350 knots. I'm gonna descend to around 3,000 feet. I'm close to being at around 5 nautical miles away from the airfield. So my second call, and it's gonna be like this. Kutaisi traffic, Airfield 11 at the initials. And then I'm gonna go ahead and descend further so that I'm at around 800 feet above ground level before I arrive at the beginning of the airfield. And I'm gonna basically fly a little bit to the right side of the runway. You can see my altitude here. Okay, 800 feet. Now at around 3/4 of the runway, I'm gonna go throttle idle and then brake. So throttle idle, braking at around 2G while descending. At 250 knots, I'm gonna drop my gear. Not there yet. Okay, gear down. 230 knots, full flaps, and then I'm gonna level out a beam of the runway. So you can see the runway is to my left hand side. Oh, I descended a lot. I need to pick up altitude again. I'm gonna trim my aircraft for on-speed angle of attack, and I'm gonna go up to 600 feet where I'm supposed to be. That's a mistake. I shouldn't have descended below 600 feet. I'm looking at the runway to my left hand side, and at around this point I need to start rolling towards the runway. So I'm going to turn towards the runway. I'm trimmed, my airplane is trimmed. I am at on-speed angle of attack, and I'm looking at the runway to my left hand side. I'm modulating my throttle to make sure that I don't descend a lot. And there's the runway in front of me. And I'm going to announce now to the tower, Airfield 11 short final 07. I'm going to align my aircraft with the runway. I make sure that I put my velocity vector at the beginning of the runway. This is the point at which I will touch down. And there it is. I have to keep an eye on my rate of descent, not more than 750 feet per minute. And touchdown. Throttle to idle, applying wheel brakes. Slowing down, slowing down. And then as I exit the runway, I need to also announce that to the tower. Airfield 11 exiting the active 07. And this is it. I'm now out of the runway and I'm heading to the parking area where I should park my aircraft and turn it off. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like this video, I appreciate that you click on like and subscribe. It would help this channel a lot. Thank you again and have a nice day. Bye bye.